Hi, everybody. We're just opening up the webinar, opening it up a little bit early so that people can join. So we're a little bit before the starting time. So just hang tight and we'll get started in a little bit. Starting to get a few more people in. So now that we've kind of hit 3 o'clock. So if you're just joining us, thanks very much for giving us a bit of your time this afternoon. We'll just give it a couple minutes while we wait for people to join us. Hope everyone's enjoying their Thursday. If you're just joining and you want to say hello and using the chat, just make sure that you're using the to everyone rather than just hosts and panelists. But yeah, if you want to say hello, where you're from, maybe you can also put what you maybe want to get out of today's webinar, and Jonathan and I can see if we'll hit one of those topics or bring it up in the Q&A. Hi, Emma. I feel like it's always sunny in Bristol, like it's always sunny in Southampton, which not so much. Yesterday was dreadful. It was very rainy. Hi, Hamish. Hi, Jack. Looking forward to learning a lot. No pressure. Well, hopefully you'll learn something from today's webinar. All right. For those of you who are just joining, we're just kind of saying hi in the chat, where you're from, maybe what you're looking forward to learning today. And we'll get started in a little bit. I'm gonna give out a shout out to Melanie from PGS, who did their second Giving Day yesterday. It was amazing. So congrats to Melanie. I don't think Holly from Emmanuel, they did their Giving Day as well, and it was also equally great. But yeah, shout out to Melanie and the PGS team. Just give people a couple more minutes. Hi, Anna. All right, Jonathan, should we get started?
Let's go.
All righty. All right. So we are here today for WD-40 for your online giving forms. We wanted to do a talk about improving your online giving conversion rates, your online giving form friction, and everything that kind of goes along with that. So hopefully through the conversation today and what Jonathan and I have to share, we'll give you some insights and some takeaways about how you can improve online donation form friction and improve conversion rates. So this voice that you've been listening to for the past 3 minutes is I'm Kat, and I'm Hubbub's commercial director. I've been with Hubbub for about 5 years, and I mostly work with our customers, helping them to run their online campaigns from giving days to crowdfunding and everything in between, and really helping people to understand how they can improve their giving conversion rates, all the insights that we're seeing from the sector and the customers that we work with. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to work with our customers. Before that, I joined Hubbub from the University of Southampton, where I was their regular giving manager, and I worked with the Southampton team for about 7 years. And that's really where I kind of started looking at digital giving, online giving, and how you can use it to transform your giving audience and the response rates that you are seeing. So that's me. I'll hand over to Jonathan.
Yes, thank you. I'm Jonathan. I'm one of the founders of Hubbub. I've been in the digital giving space, therefore, for about 10 or 11 years now. A bit like Kat, done a little bit of everything in Hubbub since day one, everything from building bits of technology, obviously running the company and working with some clients too. I'm also an associate at More Partnership, helping on digital strategy for organizations on their fundraising and alumni engagement. Really, really delighted to be talking about, I think this whole series, we're delighted to sort of talk about some of the stuff we've learned over the last decade or so in the sector. It feels like, the partnership we have with a number of organizations have put us in this immensely privileged position to be able to see what's kind of working really well, what isn't, what's a bit of a challenge for organizations, both in terms of strategy and in terms of implementation, technology and things like that. And one of the areas that we don't get to talk an awful lot about is the kind of details of the psychology of giving forms, the stuff that works really well, the stuff that kind of accidentally gets in the way. And we're all data geeks here. Kat will confess as well. We love looking at things like conversion rates and giving and the giving forms and the things that are blockers. And we've spent obviously a lot of effort trying to make sure that the forms that we've got and the platforms we've got very much don't get in the way and are some of the highest converting that we can possibly achieve. So this is talk about some of the things that can go wrong, talk about what you can do about them, and look at the kind of common forms of friction that you can see and why it's really important to try and get them right. The learnings from this are not just applicable, obviously, to an online giving form. These apply to pretty much anywhere where you've got a form, somebody might click on something, an email that links them somewhere. They kind of apply to almost any form of engagement that you want someone to take on the web. And we've drawn examples from a few different places as well. Obviously, our core expertise being in the digital giving side. So without further ado, I will hand back to Kat to sort of kick off the talk and talk us through why this is really important. And that means Kat telling me when to click onto the next slide, I think. So here we go.
All right. Yeah, so two on, please. Do my best, Chris Whitty. Next slide, please. There we go. All right. So what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk a little bit about where online giving is now. We need to, in order to move forward, you got to understand where you are. We're going to talk about the causes of online donation form friction. And then we're going to talk about some tips to improve friction and to increase conversion rates. And then we will have time for a Q&A. So please do at any time, if you have a question and it pops into your head, don't feel like you're interrupting us, put it into the Q&A, and then we will get to them at the end. There are no silly questions. It's one of my pet peeves when someone says, this is a silly question. It's not a silly question because it's you don't know the answer, and that's okay. We may or may not know the answer, but all questions are welcome and are good questions. So please ask away. All right, next slide. All right, where online giving is now, and are we ready for 2025? So before we kind of talk about online giving specifically, I wanted to get into donation form friction and how we improve it. I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about the overall online experience, because giving online is just one of those experiences. And every day we use websites and apps to make decisions about how to make purchases that make our lives easier, better. And we largely do this out of convenience, but also out of enjoyment. So if we kind of take, the first one with, fitness and well-being, we use an app or online classes so that we don't have to leave our homes. It's definitely something that I've done a lot more in the last 2 years. Don't get me started on Peloton. It's my fave. But I'm one of those people. But, we use fitness, we use well-being, we go online to do that. We look for recipes online. We do Joe Wicks workouts on YouTube, but, we use that as a part of our everyday lives. We use banking online. So instead of having to go out into town, spend, an hour doing that, I can just log on, do my banking, and I'm in and out and done. Moving money around, that's much more convenient, much more secure than it probably was 2 years ago. And so we do that out of convenience. We also book appointments. We shop online. We buy things from Amazon, maybe multiple times a day without realizing that we're maybe doing that. We keep in touch with friends and family. We do our food shopping online. Maybe we have food subscription services. And then we donate online, or we encourage other people to donate online if we are the charity themselves. But I wanted to really kind of talk about the whole landscape of how we use, online, so that we're not just talking about giving online in a vacuum, because it's all the same to the donor. It's, they don't look at one thing and then come to our website and think, oh, you're a charity. It's okay that you're a little bit behind. I'll still persist. I will still fill out your form. They won't. And so, that is why we're here today, is to talk about how we can make those improvements so that our donors are getting that seamless experience online, whether they've just come off, banking online, or they've just done their food shop. And then they also think, oh, I need to make that gift. Today's so-and-so's giving day. I want to make sure that I do that, but I have a limited amount of time. So it needs to be an easy and simple process. So giving online is one behavior of many that people choose to participate in, and the expectations are very high, because the donation page needs to feel, look, and act the same like anything else that the donor might choose to participate in. And if we can replicate those feelings that they experience on all the other websites that are kind of forward in their kind of thinking and the way that they've provided the experience to the donor, our donors will feel more confident, because as soon as that confidence dips, that's where the friction point is. And that friction point could turn that donor away, not because they don't want to give to the charity, not because they don't care, but because the friction on the form is just too much for them to endure. And we'll talk a little bit later about how they get to that point and the things that you can do to tackle it. And because of the impact of the pandemic, the ways that we interact with online tools and apps and websites has really drastically changed. And so it's important that giving moves at a similar rate and maintains the kind of overall status quo with the majority of online activities. So giving online doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen outside of a different internet that people accept because it's the charity space. It's all the same to the donor. Next slide. So online behaviors have really changed in the last couple of years. You'll probably agree from your own behaviors, but there was a McKinsey study about will these new digital habits that we've picked up stick in a kind of post-pandemic world? So just to give you an idea of how big that shift was in the last couple of years, in Europe, about 70 million people, which is about 9% of the whole population, adopted new digital services, and 10% of that was just in the UK alone. And this was across all generations. So it wasn't like you just had younger people adopting new technologies. You had lots of different individuals picking up technologies in different ways, mostly because they didn't really have another choice. So they found that in the study that what they experienced in terms of growth was 5 years of growth, and we jumped from 2020 to 2025. And a similar study that Microsoft did found that in April of last year, we experienced 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. So the pandemic was what it was, but for technology and jumping forward in time, we really moved, and a lot of that was out of necessity, or that it was now the right moment for those things to kind of come forward. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those things are. But in this time, we all kind of picked out these habits out of necessity or to gain access to things online when there weren't any other options available. So next slide, Jonathan. Ooh, there we go. So some of those things were working out in our homes. We couldn't go to the gym. So we had to find new ways of keeping fit. So, Joe Wicks, I mentioned him before, he saw a huge boom in people participating in his YouTube workouts, buying his cookbooks, really kind of getting into the home workouts. I used to say, I would never work out at home. There's not enough space. But once you're presented with the only opportunity to work out is in your living room, in your flat, that's what you're going to do if you want to keep doing that. We ordered much more online for our food deliveries. A lot of that was out of necessity. We were kind of being told to stay home and not go out if we couldn't, if we didn't have to. So a lot of food stores had to find ways of delivering. Some of them were already doing that, and so it increased demand. Some were not doing that. So Marks and Spencer's were not doing home deliveries, and so they had to figure out a way. Do they pivot? Do they not? How do they get people kind of into their stores, or how do they deliver if they're not able to do that? And that's where they created a partnership with Ocado. Online banking, this was mostly kind of there already, but more people started using online banking. My parents, for example, and this is where you get the generational split, my parents would not bank online. They didn't think it was safe. They didn't trust it. They wanted to go talk to a person. All of those things are understandable. But when you couldn't go outside and you couldn't do those things, online banking then became the necessity. But through it, they became more comfortable. So that's one of the things that would probably stick now for some people, is that they would be more comfortable doing things like online banking, and that will stick as they kind of move forward in time. But with online banking, that obviously probably saw a big shift in the way that technology grew. And it probably is where, in 2025, because I don't know if you notice when you go online, the security measures that they have in place, we've had to improve security measures on our sites to make sure that we're using the latest regulations. That's really moved on in time so that people feel more safe, more secure at a quicker rate than they probably would have had to have developed without the pandemic. We use things like Deliveroo for food. We use Disney Plus because we couldn't go to the movies, and we shopped online. And we also had some shifts for donors. So Jonathan, if you go to the next slide. And I think what's important with this is that this isn't just about online behaviors. So you may have been sending out some direct mail to your donors, and before the pandemic, they would take that free post envelope, they would take that donation form, they would put the information on the form, they would get a stamp, they would find a post office, and they would put that gift in the post, and it would make its way to you in about 3 days. But we couldn't do that in the pandemic. So a lot of people opted for giving online, and we saw a really big increase in the amount of donors who were giving online via kind of every mechanism. It wasn't just that people were getting emails and making gifts online. That seems like the really kind of obvious journey, but people were getting direct mails and making a gift online. And it may be at this point that people kind of maybe started to think that online experience isn't great. And we need to make it better because we're sending out really great comms. Our letter is really compelling. We're telling great stories. We paid for an agency to help us write this letter, to put this all together. And then it's getting to the donation form, and it's all falling down because there's friction. I was in a similar position to at the University of Southampton, when I was working there, we were sending out a really big direct mail, and I just couldn't direct people to our online donation form. It was horrible. So the kind people at Hubbub created a form for us, and we drastically improved our conversion rates. And this is, a kind of similar thing that we were seeing during the pandemic, but it was all forced behaviors. Next slide. All right, so the question that the city asked is, will these new digital habits stick in a post-pandemic world? And do we really need to worry about our online, conversion rates, or is it just a trend and people will go back to giving through the post? So, some people will turn off from those things that they used to do, but others will stick with the things that they find convenience and enjoyment in because they're just easier or they've adapted. And there are some opportunities to keep those valuable, kind of customers as we move into this kind of new era. Next slide. So people will go back to the gyms, people will go do their food shop in the store, people will go back into banks, people will go out to dinner, people will go to the movies, and people will return to stores. And for our donors, Jonathan, you go to the next slide, they will choose to find a post box and stick their donation in the post, or they may feel very comfortable with giving online. Or maybe they don't feel comfortable giving online, and so they're going to go back to what they know. And I think this is the decision maker as to if people keep those behaviors. Is it an improvement on what they had before? And if it's an improvement on what they had before, well, then they'll stick with it. But if it's not, they'll go back to their old ways, or they won't do it at all. And we really want to try and find ways in which we can make those experiences better and keep those people doing those things that they did during the pandemic, but because they enjoy them. And that's the thing that we really want to get out of this, is that they enjoy the experience. Next slide. So the opportunities that we have to keep these kind of really valuable online experiences and our really valuable customers is because there's just this need for tech everywhere. And we've had a forced paradigm shift, and the bar has been raised. Online experiences were probably pretty high before, but in the pandemic, we had the opportunity to see what experiences were like outside of our kind of local bubble, and we could see kind of global experiences. So if you were in, Sydney, Australia, you could attend a concert at the New York Philharmonic, whereas maybe before you wouldn't have been able to do that. And then, what does Sydney do locally? Does that match what New York does? And then people have these expectations that if one thing is like, if one thing is this way, this other thing that I do should also be that way. And it's exactly the same. So you have to, kind of meet those expectations where the individuals are. And so we have to provide better user experiences because we need to inspire trust. We need to make sure that people feel, that we're handling their data safely, their payment information safely, that there's kind of ease of movement across channels. That if I send them an email and they look at their mobile device and they then go online on their desktop and they get the same experience, that feeling is the same, and vice versa. And that we're learning from other sectors, and that we're innovating, because again, it's all the same. There's no separation for donors in terms of their online experience. So now is really the time to test and to gain feedback and to innovate, because we need to give people that sophisticated digital experience. But the question that I kind of want to put to everybody is the sector ready? And maybe in the chat right now, you can maybe say what you think. Is the sector ready to be more sophisticated, to test, to innovate, to provide donors with a better user experience? Maybe everyone's shy, which is understandable. Oh, yeah, so probably not yet. I agree. And I'll tell you why. So, Jonathan, if you can go to the next slide. All right. So for those of you, thank you, who kind of put out your opinion there. Thank you for doing that. And the sector largely agrees with you. So in a Global Web Index survey, 73% of kind of IT decision makers in the charity sector, or sorry, in the tech sector said that they were ready for digital disruption. And of course they are. They're the tech sector. They have to be ready for digital disruption. If they're not, then what are they doing in that space? But only 10% of the charity sector was ready. And in a report from Blackboard in 2021, the Status of UK Fundraising Report, they said that only 60% of nonprofits professionals agreed that digital transformation is critical to success, that technology must be used to improve the way organizations operate, and that data must also be used to improve overall performance. But only 12% of those respondents describe themselves as being digitally mature. So, I think there's a large agreement in there that we're not ready, but we know that we need to be ready. So how can we do that? And to just Joe's point there, it does completely depend on the charity and its supporter demographics. So it, but I just would caveat that with the older generation is much more digitally savvy than they were before. If, just going back to the example of my parents and how much they now use digital technologies before the before the pandemic. And if my mom had to go online and make a gift, she'd probably be much more willing to do that now than she was 2 years ago. So I think it's no longer something that you can only say, well, it's only young people that give online. So I don't necessarily think that's true. So, all right, next slide. All right, so this is the tech adoption kind of curve. And I thought it might just be a useful way to kind of demonstrate where we are in terms of adapting and adopting to technology. That you have on the very left side in the early market, those tech enthusiasts, the visionaries, which is where kind of all the other sectors are. And the charity sector is kind of over on the other side in the mainstream market, where the pragmatists, the conservatives, and the skeptics think. And this isn't to say that we as individuals are not tech enthusiasts, are not visionaries, but that we sit in a sector that is more pragmatic, more conservative, more skeptical. So I think that everybody on this call is like, you're nodding your head and you're saying, yep, we need to be more on the left, but we're stuck in a sector that is kind of in the middle or more to the right. But we need to kind of move over to the left-hand side if we're ever going to have a chance of kind of moving with the times. And I just want to also do a little visual of that paradigm shift, just to really show you how that's moved. So Jonathan, if you go to the next slide. So before the pandemic, the online experiences for charities may have been in kind of the 2018 era, as everybody else was kind of sitting comfortably in 2020. But there wasn't that big of a gap in between giving and the rest of kind of the online engagement experience. And, people were kind of moving towards 2021, but we're all kind of happy, bumbling along where we were. And then the pandemic hit. So Jonathan, if you go to the next slide, that gap increased. So if McKinsey are saying that we've moved to 2025 and Microsoft are saying that we're already in 2023, but giving is still in 2020, we're creating a bigger gap and we're creating more friction. And if our donors think that giving online is just the same as shopping online, they're going to have increased expectations and expect a better experience when giving online. And, we have to find ways of not standing in front of that so that we can meet our audiences where they are. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Jonathan. Oh, sorry, and one more thing, but I think I said that. So you go ahead, John.
Superb. Thank you, Kat. So as Kat said, this is super important. It's one of the things that ultimately, even if some people do go back to giving by check, giving by post, giving in the ways that they've been most familiar with, a good chunk of people are going to both, for the first time and in a continual way, use digital platforms, even if the solicitation method that they got was offline. This is becoming a much more important part of our infrastructure for DM campaigns as well as it is for email campaigns, and it will probably continue to be like this for some time. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is some of the kind of psychological causes of online form friction. And it's quite generic here. This isn't talking just about giving forms, but I will give you some examples a little bit through this of things that I've lifted. One or two I've made up and one or two I've lifted from forms that are real and out there in the market, but I have carefully anonymized them to make sure we don't embarrass anybody. So this is really important because most of the reality about kind of friction on forms is that bit in bold here. This is it's about psychology. It's not about functionality. So this is about this thing is in front of me. Do I understand it? Is it cognitively easy? Can I figure out what you're asking me to do and do it quite quickly? And as a result, it's really important that we stand in the donor's shoes. And if we can't do that very easily, we test it. So this is one of the things that digital lets you do that really no other medium you can get quite as much feedback on. So, I mean, first things first, you can stand and watch somebody complete it. That's super important. And I would say it's the cheapest possible way of assessing your online giving experience is to get a family or a friend it's a family member or a friend to sit in front of your online form, and you watch them as they click through it and they try and find their way to give. You will learn enormous amounts about which words make sense, which words don't make sense, which buttons are in the right place, which ones aren't, and which options make sense and which don't, just by watching somebody, even somebody quite close, complete it. But obviously there's a lot more we can do. And Kat's going to talk a little bit about instrumentation and benchmarking and stuff later. We also have a webinar in a month's time on how to get Google Analytics properly hooked up to infrastructure so you can start measuring various forms of conversion rate. But caring about friction on forms is all about this sort of move towards donor centricity. And it's been a movement in the sector for quite some time. I seem to remember 10, 15 years ago, there's been quite a big campaign to move towards donor centricity. But this is sort of saying, okay, we may have our ways of doing things, but actually getting that donor to succeed in their giving experience is at least as important as our ways of doing things. It is a balance, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. It is a balance because we don't just, in most cases, want the money. We also want to be able to talk to somebody. We also want to be able to follow up. There is a relationship there. So it isn't as simple as just making every single gift go through as quickly as possible. It is something where we do need to make sure that we've still captured enough information. And I'll show you some examples of what I mean. But let's not get in the way of that donor becoming a supporter of our organization. It is also a little bit about getting away from fundraiser biases. So this is one of the things that happens quite a lot in this sector and also in marketing. So there's no attack on fundraising or specifically. This is one of the things that happens in marketing and comms and PR and stuff. Anything that's public facing is that the things that make sense to us are the things we assume make sense to our donors. And then that causes a problem because our donors actually don't understand the same language or the same acronyms or the same kind of, or the cause in the same way we do. They don't relate to it the same way. And so this is one of the reasons why having testing, ideally empirical stuff, data, stuff that comes from the conversion rates on the forms is really important. But even if you can't do that, just getting somebody outside the organization to test the form and run through it is really important, because if it's just you testing it, you'll skip all of the things because they make perfect sense to you. So just make sure that somebody external testing it. It is a little bit about getting away from internal ops and procedures and labeling and convenience. So this is kind of important just because we've always done something a particular way, and this comes up quite a lot, for example, in things like payments, and payments being a really big piece of online giving forms. We may have a way of accepting payments today, but it might be quite painful. It might be a little bit old school, and it might not integrate well with modern web forms. And this is really important because if you give a donor a difficult payments experience, they are unlikely to complete it. And it might be really convenient for us to run it through our reporting interface. But if we don't get the donor, it doesn't really matter very much. So this is about sort of inverting it a little bit, trying to get in the shoes of the donor. And just coming back onto this, just the bar has gone so much higher, as Kat has spent the first part of this talk talking about. The bar has just gone so much higher. There are the kind of quality of web interfaces on both mobile and desktop. Banking is now flying ahead, actually, in many cases. If you think about where that was 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of bank interfaces were pretty terrible and really frustrating, and we just rant about them all the time. Even government stuff is now really good. And I say even government stuff because government is not a typical tech early adopter. But if you think about the quality of the experiences around even the coronavirus testing forms and things like that, those worked. They were really simple to use. They were very well designed. Yes, they had scale problems, but they were enormously well designed for the actual user. And so the bar has just gone so much higher, and we need to be there. Ideally, we want to be ahead of the curve. So let's talk about friction types. There are many, many, many different types of online form friction. These are 4 that have come off the Next After and Fundraise Up collaboration. We'll point you to there's some links to this a little bit later on, and we'll point you to them. But there's 4 examples of types of friction, and I'm going to talk about them in the context of online giving forms. The first is decision friction. This is asking people to decide between too many different options, giving them lots and lots of different choices or things that they might want to give to. The second is confusion friction. This is forcing people to make a decision they're not equipped to make. So this is giving them like language they maybe haven't come across before, or things that might make sense to the organization, but the donor doesn't really understand at all because they're not part of the organization yet. The third is field number friction. Really, this is just overloading people with far too many bits of data that you would really like, but actually they don't really need to or want to give to you right now. And the fourth is steps friction. Too many clicks, page reloads, steps. We see a lot of this in the giving form space. And the reason is primarily that we often have a component of this flow, which is about collecting information about the donor. And we have a component of it that's about payment processing. And when you have these 2 things together, people tend to like to add more things in. So it would be nice if we just knew a little bit more about this person, or could we also validate their address? Or maybe we want to also have another section about volunteering or whatever. And by the time you've actually got all of it together, you started with maybe 1 or 2 different areas, some basic information and some payment stuff. And you've ended up with 4 or 5 different areas. It gets even worse where you ask people to do things like log into other things in the middle of their giving process. But this is quite a common thing to see in this space. As I said, there are many more. One that I've not put on here, but does actually afflict the charity sector quite a bit, is forms that just don't work. And so this is quite important. It sounds really obvious, but try to make sure there's a process by which somebody is actually testing your online giving infrastructure at least once a month, if not every week. It's very common to come across charity online giving forms that have been broken for a few days or a few weeks and no one's noticed yet. And the reason is that you don't get alerted when it's broken until a supporter emails you. And the problem is supporters tend not to. They tend to just give up. And so you tend not to know until you see it yourself. So just one of those things just to put in as a regular activity is to make sure there is a test for your infrastructure that's checking it all the time. So this is important. This is far from complete. This is just a framework. And the reason I love frameworks and the reason I love copying other people's is because we're then all on the same page. We know what we're talking about. We have labels. So when we're trying to talk to each other or in the organization about why something is important, why we need to change it, we can say, this is an example of decision friction. Here is a reference. Here are some examples to it. And this is the impact that it's going to have. So this is why I love frameworks, because they allow us to have a common language and compare and benchmark against other people. This is well understood. This one is well evidenced. I would suggest you use this if you're trying to build a case internally around why you need to improve your infrastructure. But there's a slightly important point here. So it needs to be applied in context. So friction in one place is not necessarily friction in another. So if you know, and this is coming to Joe's point earlier, Joe Jennings Bundy, if you have an audience that you know really well, and that's the only audience that is going to be seeing that particular web form, and you know quite a lot about them, you can afford to ask some pretty difficult questions, that no general donor would know, because they're the people that are hitting that form, and you know and understand that audience. But if you then open that form up to a much wider audience, it wouldn't make sense to them. So in context, with some supporter bases, it is important that not, friction in one place is not always the same in another. And you'll see some examples a little bit later. So let's talk about decision friction. This is asking donors to decide between too many options. Well studied, well understood, something we've all been doing in fundraising for a very long time. And this is one of the reasons why we suggest giving levels to donors. So we give them the amounts that they might consider giving, give them specific options of the recommended campaign we'd like them to support, or the recommended designation that's important to us. We pre-fill fields, whether this is on things like giving forms that they physically have to send back, or whether it's on the web with suggested amounts. And what we're trying to do here is reduce the decision making and give people permission to give at a particular level to a particular thing. So if you get to a form and you get an empty box that says, what would you like to give to? That's really, really hard because you've no idea what the options are. Then if it has a drop down in it and it has 5 or 6 options, then it's a little easier, but you have to know what the 5 or 6 options are. If it says, we would like you to give to this campaign or to this designation, that again becomes a yes, no. Do I want to or do I not want to? And it's a much simpler decision for someone to take. The same is true if you fill a box out with a suggested donation amount. If you leave the box empty, somebody has to think, what have other people given? Would I be the only one giving at this level? Is this too little? Is this too much? Was the charity expect? Would somebody be offended? And so all of this stuff going around people's heads, and you're forcing them to think and worry and become anxious. And we don't want any of that. You put the suggested donation level in, then all of that's gone. That is then clearly okay. If you put 25 in, somebody's like, okay, they're expecting me to give 25. And if I want to change it, I can. I make it 250 or I make it 10. But it's suggesting it takes away all of the kind of fear in people's heads about whether they're doing the right thing. So I'll show some examples of this in a second. But some things to be careful about. Don't present donors with lots of different things that they can support in the interests of giving donors choice. Donor choice is a good thing. We want them to see, the amazing work that's going on in the organization and them to feel like they have a choice for what they support. But just remember that when you do that, the best place to do that is in stewardship comms. It's to show them all of the other pieces of work that are going on and give them a sense of the bigger picture. When you're actually asking for a gift, you want to direct them to the thing that you think is most appropriate to reduce the friction. So a good example, if you have an online giving platform with 5 or 6 different areas, try to avoid sending people to the front page of that platform. If you're going to run an email campaign, send them straight to the thing you think is most relevant for them. And if you don't know what that is for the whole audience, that's fine. Think about how you segment that audience. So maybe you've got an email list with a few thousand people on, and some of them are going to want to give to one thing and some to another. Well, it's best that you take that decision for them. Don't just send everybody to the decision point. Send half the audience to one and half the audience to another. You're making their lives a lot easier. Finally, this is an example of kind of where the context is really important. There's nothing wrong with asking someone to fill out a field if it's something they already know. Right. So if you're, and I've got an example of this in a second. So if you're asking someone to choose whether they should support, for example, their local region or the subject they studied or the house they went to at a particular school, the college they went to, things donors kind of already know about themselves that are already true. That's not choice, really. That's just filling out a piece of information that's easy. So just because you've got a long list of options, it doesn't mean that it causes friction. Friction is where you're trying to make a decision. Friction is where you're forcing somebody to make a decision about something. This isn't a decision. This particular point is about gathering information. The second one here, I'm not going to name the charity again. This is a screenshot straight off the website, but the confusion friction is forcing donors to make a decision they're not equipped to make. Pretty much everybody on this call, I'm guessing, knows exactly why the options on the right are presented like this. This is a straight up PECR, GDPR, this is a very clever piece of framing that allows for what you are and aren't allowed to do with or without consent. And it's ordered in this way to make it easy for the charity to maximize the amount of consent it gets from donors. Problem is, that's really confusing. That's 4 rapid checkboxes. The first 2 are one way round, they're opt-in. Second 2 are the other way round, they're opt-out. But a donor thinks of email, text, phone, and mail as 4 similar channels, i.e. you are asking a donor about 4 things, 4 ways in which they could be contacted. They're visually identical on this form, but you've inverted the meaning of the checkbox halfway through the experience by making the first 2 guesses and the second 2 no's. Now, this isn't actually designed to trick a donor at all, but I promise you that some people filling this out will think that this is a trick because it's sufficiently confusing and difficult to understand what will actually happen. Even if somebody does decode what the options mean, you've forced them to stop and think. And at that point, you've made them make more decisions. Do I want to keep going with this process? So try to be really careful about things that, again, suit us, but might confuse the donors. This is really good from the charity's point of view, but this is going to reduce the conversion rate from the point of view of donors. And there are other examples of this, giving to very specific areas or designations that donors don't understand. Even using the word designation is the kind of thing that might cause confusion here, because donors don't think in terms of designated funds, restricted gifts, unrestricted gifts. They're just giving to a cause that they support. Just still thinking, in the interest of time, let's move on. There's a point here at the bottom I will speak like this. So one of Kat's bugbears that has now become mine is first-time donor challenges on giving days, and I have to mention this. So a donor doesn't often know that they're a first-time donor. They don't necessarily really care that they're a first-time donor, and if you ask them whether they're a first-time donor, firstly, you've asked them to remember something about whether they are or aren't, which is confusing in itself, because why does it matter? Secondly, they may get it wrong, and they may worry about whether they've got it wrong. They may actually stop and go and check their records of, am I a first-time donor? By which time you've completely disrupted the giving flow entirely. So the question is, this might matter a lot to the organization, but if it doesn't really matter to your donor, why do it? Find another way of doing this. Find another way of challenging people who maybe haven't had that much engagement in the past. Field number friction. I'm going to come on to a couple of visual examples of this because it's a lot easier to explain visually. And I'd say this is probably where the biggest trade-off happens in the sector. This is, does the money matter most? Does the information matter most? Now, I generally err on the side of, don't try and ask somebody for things that are irrelevant to them at the time they're making that gift, but you do need enough to contact them. Like it's pretty rare in the mass giving space that the first gift is the value we get out of the donor. It's pretty rare. Most of the value we get, the lifetime value of a donor, is in the opportunity to keep talking to them and get more gifts off them in the future. So just work out what the minimum is we actually need to retain that donor and that conversation going forwards. Because it is super important we convert them. Otherwise, what's the point having that information in the first place? But I think that we often, in this sector, we take this too far. We ask too many questions. We'd love to have more information. And I think this is one of those where we just need to start thinking, how do we get less, but then have a really good journey, rather than how do we collect all the information up front? And then I've talked a little bit about this one already. This is kind of steps. This is how many steps you have. Avoid things like creating accounts and logins. Avoid, this is another little bugbear of mine, and I'm fairly sure Kat's too, having to enter the same information in more than one place. So this typically happens where you try and capture a bit of information about someone and then send them to a payment gateway. If you do that and the payment gateway then asks you, again, all the same information, what's your name, what's your address? It's really, really frustrating for a donor. And then one of the things that has happened in the last couple of years is because our bar for digital experience has gone up so much. If we start to feel frustrated, or if we just think, well, this is a bit of a joke, I'm being asked to do it again, or this is the kind of thing which just makes us give up. And worse still, it actually makes us lose respect a little bit for the organization that we're trying to support. Like, this isn't that complicated, this really ought to work. The number of times you hear people or you see people actually venting about negative online stuff, on networks like Twitter, you really need to avoid that kind of thing. So before we jump onto this last bit, I do just want to show a couple of examples quickly. I am going to rely on you, Kat, to scream if you can't see my screen, but if you can, you don't need to say anything, so that's fine. All right, happy days. So what area would you like to give to? Here's an example. I couldn't use any real examples here because it would just give away everything about the platforms and the universities I was in particular looking at here. But here's an example of something quite friction, quite friction to do with decisions. There's a lot on here. They're not all the same kind of thing. They're all slightly different. We've got geography, penguins, astrophysics, geology, oceanography. So we've got some sciences in here. We've got student support, international students, microbiology. We've got some nice pictures. They're nice, they're good pictures. But it's really confusing because as a donor, I'm like, okay, I don't really know. I mean, pretty obviously, and this is really important, there is an anchor in this, and I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about anchoring. Penguins are pretty cool, and I think if you gave people the choice here, most people would probably go with penguins. It's a bizarre anchor. It's just like penguins, that's cool and random, and it sticks out a little bit. But there's 8 options on here and another option. There's no indication of which one we should give to. It's just it's too many. It's not well grouped, and they're all slightly different types of things. You can simplify this quite radically into firstly, where the need is greatest, which allows me to choose as an organization. Now, this does 2 things. One, it makes the gift unrestricted, okay, which is kind of important. This is reflecting our needs as an organization. But 2, it's saying to the donor, you don't have to make a choice. We'll make the choice for you. It's right here. Wherever the need is greatest at this point, you know, give to this. So this actually helps us and helps the donor. It aligns our incentives. The donor doesn't want to have to make this decision. But if we give them a couple of other options here that if they really want to, they can, and we can put some other things out here. So here I've grouped international students and student support into one, just called it student support. Planetary sciences roughly covers the 3 or 4 things that are up here: astrophysics, geology, oceanography. Microbiology is not really covered by it, but that's why we also added biological sciences in. So we have biological sciences, planetary sciences. So we have roughly the same options here. This better suits us and suits the organization and the donor all in one. And so that's an example of just where you can reduce things from a decision point of view. Here's an example of asking for, well, a couple of things. This is asking for information you don't really need. This is important. So you haven't told people why you care what subject they studied. So why should they give you it is the first thing that's wrong with this. The second thing is, it's lovely to have all the pictures here, but they really add no value. It's quite difficult to find your subject. If you had 30 or 40 subjects on here, it would be nearly impossible. So the first improvement that you can make here is to explain why you want it, firstly, okay? The subject with the most donors will unlock an additional £5,000 in challenge gifts. Brilliant. Now I understand why you want it. I know what subject I studied, so now it's really easy to give you the information. The problem is you still have to find my subject, which is also quite complicated. If you just list them out, put them in alphabetical order, they're a lot easier to find. So if you imagine you had 30 or 40, I know where mine is, and I know where I'm looking for it because they're in alphabetical order. It makes it cognitively, for many people, and I must say this is one where you should test it, but for many people, this makes it easier because an image doesn't always correspond to a subject. It's a lot easier to just read the words. This is one I lifted straight off a university's website, and I have anonymized it just enough that you won't know whose it is. So on the giving form, the first question is donation amount, and these are the options presented to you. Now, this is problematic for a number of reasons. The first is there's a lot of options on here. That's just the first thing that jumps out. The second is that we haven't asked somebody at this point whether they're thinking of making a regular gift or not. And indeed, on that form, the regular gift button is 3 or 4 questions below this. But this is asking us how much we want to give, which is itself a bit confusing because if you see in the table, options D and G refer to regular gift options, whereas the rest of them don't. And so this could be me selecting my monthly or my one-off gift, or my annual gift or my one-off gift. And there's just so much we can do to improve this experience with a few very, very small tweaks. But this is one of the, well, I won't name the gateway, but it's really easy to do this if you're using some of the out-the-box stuff that's hooked up to your CRM. Think really hard about the kind of experience for a donor when they're looking at this. The other thing that's problematic about this is there was really, although I did rename the special donor club from what it was named at, there's really no idea what what this is. There's no links, there's no explainers as to what the benefits are. So even if those were appealing, it doesn't really help. So here's how you could improve it. A very simple question up front: would you consider a regular gift? Yes or no, binary choice. Let's hit yes, and that will take me to a question. Okay, what would you like to give every month? Okay, and at this point we can put in, if you give over £1,000 a year, we'll invite you to join a special club or something like that. If we want to go back, if we hit no, we can ask, what would you like to give as a one-off gift? And we don't have to mention that £1,000 a year. So again, this is really simple, but we've changed one question into two. There's one point I want to make. £83.50. I don't know if anybody knows why it's £83.50, but that's essentially, that's taking the £1,000 a year amount, dividing it by 12 and coming up with a number that is a monthly gift that's roughly equal to that. So again, that's an organization trying to design it because it makes sense for them, but not for the donor. And again, that's not the right way around to do this. Trying to think about what makes sense for the donor. Okay. This is something not to do. Look out for it in your giving forms. I'm just giving it as an example. This doesn't mean anything to any donor unless they happen to know all of your internal acronyms, but many organizations do this all the time on things like giving day designations and things like that. If it doesn't mean something for the donor, please don't do it. There's a couple of different examples of things here that'd be a problem. Not just these acronyms, but even this unrestricted means a lot to us. Means nothing to the donor for the most part, especially on the mass giving side. So I just thought it was worth pointing out. And then finally, if you're taking the first time gift or you're taking an online gift from somebody, do you really need to know all of these things? And this is important. So again, we always tell people, focus on asking what you need to build a great journey for them. If you intend to take your donors from a first gift through to a legacy giving program, possibly something in memoriam, if you intend to take them onto volunteering opportunities, if they might be interested in making gifts of shares later, brilliant, right? Brilliant. But that's part of the journey that you have for them. This is not a question you need to ask your donors the first time they give you. But if you look at most UK university giving forms, they have some of these questions on them for that first one-time gift. And you're just making somebody think about things. I mean, in this case, you're actually making somebody think about dying at the point that they give to you, which is probably not the very best place to put that question. And also, the comms here are really short, right? If you want to talk to somebody about legacy, you have amazing opportunities to, if you've got their email and their phone and their post, and you can tell them a lot more about their legacy giving. But here, you just have one checkbox and one question. So just ask yourself whether you really need to be asking all of these questions. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'm going to jump straight back into this slideshow now. Do have a think about whether you have any questions that you want to drop in. I just noticed the Q&A is obviously open. At this point, I'll hand back to Kat.
Okay, so what are some of the things that we can do to lower donation form friction and improve conversion rates? So next slide. So it might be helpful to talk about what is good conversion. So we use a benchmark from M&R Benchmarks. They do lots of studies around online donation form conversion. And I invite you to have a look at them and what they do. But their benchmark from the point of someone being on the donation page, good conversion is about 21%. So 2 in 10 of the people who are on your website will end up making their gift. So in order to get these numbers, you need to get them from something like Google Analytics, using goals. If you have a platform that's hooked up to that, then you can do that. You can also look at web traffic. If you don't have Google Analytics, or if you're working with a provider, they should be looking at your platform on Google Analytics for their own good as well as yours. And maybe you can get that information from them. Looking at the web traffic without Google Analytics was the way that I figured out that the University of Southampton's form, I mean, I knew it wasn't great, but I needed data. So I had to get data from somewhere to show others, it's not great, can we do something about it? And we had a system where when someone was filling out the first part of the form, which was just their information, it was a very long form, we would get an email. And then when somebody actually made their gift through the payment provider, we would get another email. And so we were getting all these emails of people filling out that first part of the form and then people not doing the second bit. And so I could tell, okay, people are on the donation form and they get this far and then they don't actually make their gift. And so our conversion rate was, a certain percentage. And I could start there with my data to say, this is not good. How do we make this better? And just to give you a little bit of context as to why Jonathan and I are so passionate about that is because on our giving platforms, especially our Giving Day platforms, we see conversion rates from the donation page of about 70%. So we're really passionate about talking to others and trying to kind of get the message across about why online conversion is so good. Because if you're getting 2 in 10 donors to make a gift, great. But if you can get 7 in 10 donors to make a gift, that increases the amount of people who are giving, it increases the amount of people you can build relationships with, it increases lifetime giving, it increases relationship, and it builds that pipeline. And so this is why it's really important that you're not causing friction and that you're getting people to give on your websites. Next page. So the first one, and this has nothing to do with your form, but this is about improving the emotional journey, because the decision to give is first emotional and how much to give is practical. So you need to give people that emotional feel in order for them to then get to the donation page, make that decision, and withstand any friction that may be in their way. So we always say this to our customers when we're working with them on things like giving days, that the email, the direct mail, the phone call should give them, the donor, what they need to say yes, and the form is the final step. And I found a visual that actually explains this pretty well. If you go to the next slide, Jonathan. So this is from another Next After report, which is the state of nonprofit donor pages. So on the bottom, you have like normal daily life where, kind of blue line, and then you have something that interrupts this individual from going about their business on their day-to-day, and they call that the interrupter. So that could be an email, it could be that they get a phone call, it could be that they get that direct mail through the post and they're excited to get post that isn't a bill. And they then make the decision at that point to open it. So then you get the engagement point. And then that engagement point has to lead the donor down an emotional path to where they then start to make a decision. Do I want to keep reading this? Do I want to click the button? Do I want to keep scrolling? Do I want to look at what else is in this direct mail pack and keep reading? And if they keep on going and get to the point where they reach their kind of emotional high point, that is the point at which they are saying, yes, I want to give. So as you can see in this chart, that's, like I said, 95% of getting somebody to say yes is that decision-making process and getting them to the emotional high point. And then you hit the conversion horizon, and this is where they will withstand as much friction as possible that matches their emotional high point. So if I have a really big emotional high point and I'm super passionate, so this might be, the Ukrainian crisis at the moment, it's very emotional. People are very invested in it. And so it could be that if the donation process wasn't great, people would still withstand that process because they are so passionate and they want to make a gift and they want to make a difference. And that's maybe the one thing they wanted to do that day. But if that emotional connection is lower, and it's a kind of, yeah, I'm emotionally, attached and I see the good, but this donation form is just not working. It's not for me. I don't have time. I'm a busy person. Then my conversion horizon is much shorter. That friction is, much less tolerated. And then I get to the point of abandonment. So, I thought that this would be a really good way to kind of show visually, I'm quite a visual person, of how you can kind of get people to say yes emotionally, making sure that there's less friction so that conversion horizon stays, and then they actually end up making their gift. Next slide. This one is just another visual about those decision-making that Jonathan was talking about. So it's not a donor funnel, it's a donor mountain. So we have the fundraiser at the top of the mountain, and they are encouraging that donors to come up the mountain with little decisions every time. Do I open that email? Do I click that link? Do I get to the donation page? Does it match what was on the email? Do I feel safe? Do I feel secure? And like that decision to give is a macro decision. It's a big decision, but all the other middle mini decisions, the micro decisions, need to be made. And so if you can help the donor to climb that mountain, then you're going to be able to get them to say yes, and making those decisions for them, suggesting where they give, suggesting how much they give. One of the other things was creating separate donation forms for, certain groups or individuals. So if you do have people that you've done your research, you've done your segmentation, and you know, I'm going to ask this person for £1,000 a month because I have data that tells me that they're going to give or likely to give £1,000 a month, send them to a donation form where that is their option and send everybody else to somewhere else. Don't try and make one donation form work for everybody because it's just not going to work that way. So you can do lots of segmentation if you're able to with your donation platform by creating different pages. Right, next one. So number 3 is to do all the things that you can do to reduce friction. One of the kind of comments, which I definitely agree with, is budget. I do think that we don't invest in our online giving infrastructure as much as we should. If you looked at anything else where they invest in their digital infrastructure, they would be spending quite a big chunk of money, but they would be getting a pretty good return for investment on that. And the same would be true for investing in your online giving. If you can invest in your online giving and move from 2 people giving to 7 people giving, maybe you're spending a little bit more for creating that experience, but what you're getting out of it as a return and as your ROI will be far greater than not investing in it at all. So I think that we definitely need to invest our budget, but I know that's a conversation and that's my final point. But in step 3, you really want to try to reduce those friction points, whether they're experience or fields or decision-making or confusion. You can kind of go through your donation form and say, what can we get rid of? How can we make this better? And Next After has a friction calculator where you can go through and they'll say, do you do this? Do you do that? Do you do this? And you can say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then at the end of it, they'll give you a score and you can know how good or not so great your form is. And maybe that can give you the firepower to then do step 4. Next slide, Jonathan, which is to collaborate. Oh no, skip that one, Jonathan. Skip. So step 4 is to collaborate with team members to find ways forward. So we talked about, we as individuals are innovative, we are ready to move forward, but we work in institutions or in organizations where we don't have those kind of attitudes. So we need to talk about ways that we can move forward. So talk about your intended goals and KPIs. Are you expected to raise a certain amount, and are you expected to do that online? But is the system that you have not going to let you do that? So you want me to fundraise more online, but the form and the process that I have, it's not going to get me to where I want to be. So how do I get to where you want me to be in terms of raising more money online? See if you can run a test to understand where there are opportunities. Can you switch over to a different donation form, a different platform for 6 months, spend a little bit of money, see what the test is, run a campaign through it. I think that's the important thing. Don't just, put up a new donation form and see what comes your way. It has to be a part of an active campaign and kind of A/B test that. Invite those decision makers to be a part of the process. Nobody likes being told what to do. So get those IT people, those finance people, procurement people involved in the conversation. And then use data to make those decisions moving forward so that you're not looking at people's opinions about what works and what doesn't. Use data. And this one is a little risky, but do and ask for permission later. I have done this. It's worked in my favor. Created a certain account for a certain payment gateway without the university's permission. To be fair, I didn't know I needed the permission. I just thought, oh, I can create an account. Great, I'll do that. A little bit naive on my part. But we did it. We had that payment processor. Would I get away with it now? Probably not. But it meant that we had that, we could use it and we could move forward. And once people kind of saw that it was fine, it was fine. So I'm not saying that we should all go run amok. We should all just be really risk averse, but you can do things like maybe changing little bits on your form without asking for permission and just doing it and seeing what happens and seeing if you get a better result than maybe asking the question beforehand, which then only gets you stopped because somebody has an opinion or somebody thinks it's a lot of work. So yeah, do and ask for permission later. I've given you permission. All right, we've ran over quite a lot, but we're just so passionate about what we have to say that we wanted to make sure that we gave you all that information, but we will share the recording. Are there any questions?
But there are currently no open questions in the Q&A session, but we're very, very happy to take any if you would like to drop any in there or drop any in the chat, whatever works best. So I have a question of my own actually here, which is, I remember early pandemic in the UK here, where we had Ocado, which became this sort of huge thing that everybody was going to try and use because we weren't allowed to go to the shops and do our shopping or something. And I remember that Ocado was basically offline for the best part of 6 to 8 weeks, even for people who had used it quite regularly. And so I guess the question I had was kind of, well, Kat, you're the only other one that can answer this, but question for everyone to think about a little bit is kind of, when all of this move to ordering things online happened, and we had big providers, important ones, going offline, how did that kind of feel from a competence point of view, from a confidence in their ability to do things point of view? And this is important because this is the kind of, the experience, right? So if this happened now, if something like Ocado was offline for 6 weeks because they couldn't get their online infrastructure to work properly, I mean, it worked a little bit, but essentially no slots. It would be appalling. But back then it was kind of, I mean, it was annoying, but it was kind of inevitable. This is sort of a shift in opinions. It's just something to think about. Hamish Stewart's asked a question in the chat, so I suggest we take that one. Would you recommend having several donation pages applied to specific appeals? So I'm assuming this is having a few different pages, one maybe for each different appeal, and potentially send different audiences to them. Kat, I wonder if you take that one.
Yeah, the answer is yes, we would recommend that. And the reason why we would recommend that is because the University of Manchester has tested that. So they are running a appeal for their Rewrite Cancer campaign. So there's kind of one main form that if you were to get on to their platform and you would see that and you would click on that project and then you would continue to make that gift, everybody would see that form. But when they're emailing their constituents, which when you email a kind of known warm audience, that's where the majority of your gifts are going to come from. People aren't just going to rock up on your website and make a gift. They need that prompt. So when they're prompting people to make gifts to their Rewrite Cancer campaign, they have several different hidden donation forms that are for different age groups, different capacity levels, lapsed donors, current donors, non-donors, and they can then kind of, in the kind of project pages, you can have that personalization to say, as somebody who generously supports the University of Manchester as a something circle donor, we would encourage you to give £1,000 to the Rewrite Cancer campaign. And so you then get that, this is for me, it's personalized, I'm getting a really good experience, I know exactly what I'm being asked to give, I know where I'm giving that to, and I can then go and make that donation, and I feel really good about that. So if you can create several donation pages that then are applied to a specific campaign or a certain relationship or journey, that works really well. And that's really where we haven't really talked about personalization in this one. That's for a future webinar. But that can be the kind of secondary bit of this, is that you're creating highly emotional, highly personalized communications that then tie to a frictionless online donation experience that then make the donor feel amazing, and that they haven't wasted their time, and that they've done something good.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, like, really simple examples of this, without even worrying about messaging or personalized video. If you know that people are US tax residents, don't send them to the same form you send everybody else to. Send them straight to the US form. It's not that difficult to segment out US tax residents on your list if you know roughly where they live, and it should be fine to just send them somewhere else. You've taken at least 1 or 2 clicks out of the process, and you also made them feel like you know and care about them and their circumstance in the process by sending them straight where they need to go, rather than forcing them to find the little option that says I'm a US taxpayer and I'm going somewhere else to make my 501c3 gift. So even really simple things like that, they make a big difference to people's experience and therefore the rate at which they convert.
In the chat, I've just put the URL for Next After. And if you're watching the recording, it's just www.nextafter.com. And in there, they have a whole bunch of research. You'll be able to find the donation friction calculator, all the different studies they do. Like Jonathan said, we find good research and we echo it because we then are all on the same page, and they do some really great stuff. So if you're also looking to, how do I have this conversation with so-and-so about getting a better donation experience, they have a lot of information that you can use to put a really solid case together about how improving online donation, and not just friction, but just everything, how better online experiences make better relationships with donors. So definitely check them out.
I think we should consider wrapping this one up. We don't have questions. One of the things I would say before we have a couple of reminders here is that we are very, very happy to have a look at your existing infrastructure and give you some advice. If you would like Kat or I or anybody else at Hubbub to have a look at your existing forms, talk through where some of the opportunities are to instrument them, and what we might learn with some experiments, or how we might assess where they are. I'm very, very happy to talk to you if you'd like to explore that. Kat, I'm going to hand to you to just finally tail off the webinar with the reminders.
Sure. So we have a LinkedIn group that you can join and follow. We'll put kind of the recording information on there, as well as it's a place where you can maybe ask questions of the group around kind of digital giving, or any of those kind of activities. So it's a digital fundraising best practice Hubbub webinars. If you search for that in LinkedIn, and you can join us there. We also have another webinar next month that we slightly alluded to, which is a primer for web analytics using Google. If you're fundraising online and you're not sure what's happening behind the scenes, Google Analytics is a great tool. So we will be doing that April the 21st at 3 p.m. British Standard Time. New time for us. But other than that, I think that that's all of our announcements. We very much appreciate those of you who have stayed, and everybody else who was on the webinar today, giving us a little bit of your afternoon. I know that we're all very busy. So thank you so much for your time. And if you're watching the recording, thank you also for giving us your time, whether you're here live or listening to us at a later date. We very much appreciate it. If you need anything else from us, you can find both of us on LinkedIn at hubbub.net, or by emailing hello@hubbub.net. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day and a good weekend when it comes. Bye.